Hey Divine Ones, this is Jerome Braggs coming to you again with another live video. I wanted to tell you before we dive into today's topic that I'll be doing a live video every day for the next 2 weeks. One, because I have a long list of videos of topics that I wanted to address, and that list just continues to get bigger and bigger. So I want to get through a lot of that list. And also there's a lot I want to share with you that's been coming up for me. That I like to talk with you all with, and many of you have reached out and asked if I'd do some type of, if I'd respond to some of your questions. So I want to do that. So the next 2 weeks, I'll be coming to you live as well. Someone challenged me on Facebook recently, someone who I respect, challenged me to do 5 days of revealing to you something that I don't want you to know. And I know that if there's any place we're holding secrets in our lives, or if there's any place where we're hiding, then that's the place where we're holding illness and that we're not being well and we're not being whole. So I want to look at that for myself and see if there's anything I'm still not being truthful about or authentic about, and for my own healing, do that part. So all of this is going to be happening in the next 2 weeks. I'll be sharing some soul medicines and also be walking through something about me that I don't want people to know. So getting to today's topic. Today's topic is the soul's definition of trauma. So when we look at trauma, and this is a very important, if you know me, if you follow me for a while, my work is in helping people heal themselves, their lives and their bodies, and live more soulicious lives, which are really juicy, delicious, liberated, whole, joyful, body fortifying lives. And so a real key to that is healing trauma. So let's talk about what the soul's definition of trauma. And for this conversation, my definition of the soul is that eternal part of us, the larger, broader, more expanded aspect of us. It's the part of us that existed before this lifetime and will exist after this lifetime. It's the part of us that loves us and is love itself, is connected and one with God itself. So I'm talking from that part of us, the part of us that has the broadest, most expansive part of us, the part of us that is love, that is wholeness, and that is clarity and joy and well-being. So from that part of us, its perspective of the word trauma, what trauma is. So the word trauma, the root word of trauma is a Greek word, and it means wound. So when we look at the Western definition of trauma, we look at it as some external stimulus, some external event, usually some type of physical event in the Western definition, that happens that causes a high level of internal stress. So, for example, someone may have lost a loved one, like a child may have lost a parent very early on, or a parent may have lost a child. Someone may have been raped or abused in some way, or someone may have lost a limb. They may have gotten in an accident and lost one of their limbs, or they may have been at war or something like that. So some type of external physical event that causes a high level of internal stress, both in the psyche, in the mind, and also in the body. That's the Western definition of it. The soul's perspective of trauma is a bit deeper than that. And again, understanding that the root word for trauma is wound. From the soul's perspective, there's only ever one type of trauma. Again, with that Western definition, we usually look at trauma as many different things, like, oh, they were abused, or they were trauma. Their trauma is that their father left them when they were younger, or whatever. From the soul's perspective, there are two types of trauma. There are two in the Western world. I forgot to tell this as well. We mostly look at physical trauma, which are some of the things I just told you, but there's also emotional trauma. So there's trauma where you may be verbally abused. There's trauma where you may have been rejected or abandoned as a child, or you may have been bullied as a child about something about you, or as an adult. And so both that physical stimulus or that emotional stimulus has caused some type of internal stress in the psyche and in the body. From the soul's perspective, there's only one type of trauma. There are many types of ways to be traumatized. I mean, there are many different types of avenues that can lead to the trauma. But there's only one type of trauma. And that trauma is a disconnection from the self. somehow, through whatever stimulus, whether it was a physical external stimulus or it was emotional stimulus, somehow you have in your mind and in your emotional body, you have disconnected from the truth of who you really are. You've disconnected from the soul aspect of you. And the only thing that we're talking about when we talk about the truth of you is that somehow you no longer believe, you no longer accept and embody that you are whole, that you are enough, that you are lovable, and that you are safe just as you are. So, hey, Monique. Hey, everybody who's watching. And so that's the actual trauma, that something has happened, whether it's been emotional or external, that has caused you to disconnect in your mind. You no longer believe and you no longer express and behave from the aspect of wholeness and lovability, which is who you really are. Your true identity at all times is wholeness. And your true identity is that you are loved and lovable unconditionally. Now, there are several things that can happen. Hey, Paula. Hey, Martha. There are several things that can happen in our lives that cause us to disconnect. And why that is a trauma, why that's a wound, is because when we've disconnected from ourselves, we begin to make decisions and we develop behavioral patterns that support that disconnection. So if I believe I'm not enough and that I'm not worthy and that something is wrong with me, then I may develop some behaviors to either try and prove that I'm okay in the world or try to gain that approval in the world. It's always externally. I'm trying to gain external approval in the world, or I'll have some type of behaviors that just cause high level dysfunction. Trauma always leads to, unhealed trauma within us always leads to dysfunction. And when trauma is held for long, which I'm going to do a video about later this week, when it's held for too long, when it goes unhealed for long, it leads to chronic illness and disease. So trauma, the disconnection from the self, from the truth of yourself, the disconnection from your wholeness and your lovability, leads us to making horrific decisions for our lives. It leads us to creating realities that make us feel more unlovable and make us feel more unwhole and broken. And that is the wound. And that wound in our consciousness and that wound in our emotional state continues to bleed out. It'll bleed into our relationships. It will bleed into our finances. It will bleed into the health of our bodies until it's addressed and it's healed. So the only thing that's ever really needing to be healed in our lives or in our bodies, no matter what the diagnosis is, no matter what the problem or the challenges or the hardship that we're experiencing, the only thing we ever need to heal is the trauma that we're holding in our consciousness and in our emotional body that has then begun to seep into our physical body and into our physical realities. So the trauma, again, is there's some belief that we're holding that has made us feel that we are unwhole, that we're not whole, and that we're not lovable in some way. Now that may have come. Usually trauma is not your fault. Like it's not something that you chose to do, right? You didn't choose to have that belief. We usually receive trauma, meaning we're usually traumatized by something that usually happened in our childhood or some big traumatic event that happens in adulthood. So for instance, for me, using me as an example, when I was a child, I had two really high traumatizing events. The first was when I was 5 years old and I realized that I was attracted to boys, that I was same gender loving. And at the same time, I also knew that wasn't okay. That wasn't okay in my culture. That wasn't okay in my family. And that I was going to be rejected. I was going to be rejected. I was going to be ridiculed, and that I was not going to be safe. So I knew at that time, I kind of had this belief system that being that part of myself, being myself and expressing that in the world was going to lead to harm, right? So I was afraid, and that was a stressor for me. So in order to not be harmed, in order to not experience the separation of love, right? Because that's what I really believe, that somebody was my family or my culture or my environment was going to withhold love from me because of who I naturally am. So what I ended up doing, so the trauma was something's wrong with me. This is not good. This is something about me is going to cause people to reject me and to withhold love from me. And the behavior pattern that I adopted to support that trauma was that I hid for the majority of my life. I did not only did I not just come out and be, accept and embrace that I was a same gender loving person, but I suppressed a lot of who I was. I wouldn't really share my beliefs for fear that someone may reject me or they may find out about me. I didn't really say what I meant. And I wouldn't really just live the way I really wanted to live and express how I really wanted to live. So the trauma was that I believed something was wrong with me, and that something, me being attracted to the same gender, made something wrong with me, and it made me unlovable. The behavioral pattern, the dysfunctional behavioral pattern that I adopted to support that trauma was to hide and to lie. And how that caused stress in me was that if there was ever any opportunity that presented itself that looked like maybe that my mask that I was wearing would be taken off, or that someone may find out who I really was, I began to undergo a high level of stress. I was very afraid. I was very, very afraid. It almost felt like if someone found out about me, I was going to die, right? So that was the first trauma. The other trauma that happened was, as a kid, I was bigger than the other kids. Not only did I hit my puberty faster, so I had, facial hair and I kind of grew bigger, but I was also just a thicker guy. I was a thicker kid. But I was teased a lot when I was young. I was teased in two ways. One, I was teased for my size. So I was often called fat. And I knew that at that time that being fat was unlovable. It made me not belong in some way, right? So I believed that me being fat, something about my body, made me unlovable and made people not want to accept me. They want to reject me. So again, that was a trauma. I believed that something about me was unlovable and that I was not whole as I was, right? I need to fix myself. And so the behavior pattern that I adopted to the coping mechanism that I adopted to kind of soothe that trauma when I was a kid was two things. One, I was constantly always trying to improve my body. I just, all types of diets, all types of just extreme addiction to working out, things like that. But the other part of it was sex. Because I felt unattractive and unworthy and unlovable as a bigger guy, I became addicted to sex, because when I had sex with people, that was a way to prove to myself that I was wanted, right? But as always, if we try to put our worthiness and our worth and our wholeness in external things, that's where addiction comes in. Because the problem is your worthiness doesn't exist there, and that person or that external thing can't hold your worthiness 24/7. They have, even if that's their intention, right? Even if that's their intention, they have other things to do. Things come up for them. So when they're not 100% focused on you, you go back into the trauma wound. So that was something that I had to look at and I had to heal. And there was another thing which I'll do another video about. I won't share it here. I'll do another thing because that's something that I probably want to do in the challenge. But so that's what trauma looks like. Trauma is the places within us where we believe we're not whole and we believe we're not lovable, and we develop coping mechanisms. We develop behavioral patterns and ways of showing up in the world to try and ease that trauma, to try and hide that trauma, and that lead to dysfunction in our lives. And so when we have something to heal, whether our relationships aren't working, or we have some money issues consistently and chronically, or we're not happy in our lives, we're unfulfilled, or there's something going on in our bodies, we have a chronic illness or disease, the route to your healing, the ground level place to go that will cause and lead to the healing, is to look at the trauma, to discover what that is in you, how you're holding it, where you believe in yourself that you're not lovable and that you're not whole already, and the different ways that you've been trying to act out from that place. And to reconnect yourself, because healing is about reconnecting to the truth of your wholeness and the truth of your lovability. That's the entire process of healing is about. I've done a video on that already. You can look back on my page and see that, where I talk about what healing actually is. But that's what trauma is, and that's how it affects our lives. You know, for anyone who has not, you know, those external events are not always traumatizing for every single person. You know, there are people in the world who have had, who have been to war, and that war didn't lead to trauma. It didn't lead to a disconnection of themselves, right? They didn't believe something about them was in danger, or something was about were not whole and they weren't enough or lovable. There are people who have been raped even and abused, that rape or that abuse didn't lead to an eternal disconnection from the self, right? It may have sucked. It may have fucking sucked, right? It might have been really painful, that event, but that event didn't lead to a disconnection in their self. So they weren't traumatized from it. The trauma only comes when there is something within us that is disconnected from the truth of ourselves. So again, that event may have sucked, but if it didn't lead to trauma, it didn't suck the life out of you. And that's what trauma does. It literally sucks the life out of us. So that's the soul's understanding and perspective of trauma. It's the place within us that is disconnected from the truth that we are whole, that we are lovable, and that we're enough just as we are, without anything needing to change about us, without anything needing to add to us. That is our eternal reality. That is our eternal truth. And the healing that needs to take place in order to heal trauma is a reconnection of the self. When I'm working with clients, that is exactly what we try and do, what we're looking at. That's exactly the intention or the outcome of work with me, is how do we help you reconnect to yourself? How do we help you begin to trust yourself again? How do we help you begin to listen to your inner guidance? How do we help you understand that you're already whole, so that you stop looking for you stop rejecting yourself and leaving yourself and dishonoring and betraying yourself, and you start honoring and accepting yourself and understanding that there's nothing about you, no matter what's going on, that's not worthy and that's not enough. And also, how do we, you know, what's the pathway you need to take to begin to understand that you're lovable, so that you don't look for love out in the world, and understand that there's love is not being withheld from you. That the universe is not withholding love from you. You're just in a space, when we're traumatized, we're in a space that we cannot receive it. So that's the definition of trauma. That's the soul's definition of trauma. It is a wound that continues to bleed throughout our life until we heal it. And it's not your fault that you were traumatized. That's not actually your fault, but it is your responsibility to heal. It is your responsibility to heal. Hello, Will Brady. My website is JeromeBraggs.com. A lot of the information on my current website is a bit outdated, though. I have a new website coming out in about a month. If you want to really get into a little bit of my work, you can look at my Facebook page, which is facebook.com/Coach Jerome Braggs. Not my private one, which you're seeing this video on probably, but facebook.com/Coach Jerome Braggs. And if you want to know about my work, you can email me directly at jerome@jeromebraggs.com. jerome@jeromebraggs.com. So I hope this has helped you all. A little bit of understanding about what trauma is. It's a disconnection from the self, and healing is the process by which we reconnect to the truth of ourselves. We reconnect to our soul. And that changes everything. So as always, I love you all. Be well and live solicitously, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.